Hi, my name is Laura and this is my Case for Climate presentation. To give you a little bit of context, I built this presentation as a response to a challenge a person I have a lot of respect for gave me. What happened was I asked this person for 3 hours of their time to explain why climate change mattered so much to me and why I thought they should care more as well. And they said no. They said, I can't give you 3 hours of my time because most people won't give you 3 hours of their time, no matter how important this is. So that person said, I'm going to give you 20 minutes of my time and I need you to be the translator of climate change. Bring it back to me in a language that I can understand. And as you may know already, I'm pretty passionate about this stuff and I love a good challenge. So I built this presentation. And I thought, other people also need to be convinced. So you might want to use this presentation to convince others around you to care and take action. So I decided to make this presentation available to everyone. You can use these slides and the script that goes with it. You can remix them, you can personalize them to your own context, and I really encourage you to add your own personal touch to it. I hope this is useful, and if you end up using some bits of this presentation, I would love to know. Okay, so my name is Laura and this is my Case for Climate presentation. In 20 minutes, I'm going to give you an overview of the science and the goal we need to accomplish because I believe it's important to establish the facts. But I'm not going to stop at the science. I want to tell you why you should care, what we can do collectively as humans, and what you can do as an individual who cares about the future. So first, I need to caveat that I'm not a climate scientist or an expert. I'm just someone who was curious and concerned enough to look closer at what scientists are telling us. So all the data you will see in this presentation comes from the most trusted authorities on climate science, and all sources are available in the appendix. So here we go. First, I'm going to go back in time to show you that we're living in a truly special period in our planet's history. If you look at this graph, which goes back 500 million years, it's fair to say that the climate has been a little bit all over the place. We've had much hotter periods and much colder periods. But let's take a closer look at the last 12,000 years. You can see that we've been in a period of climate stability, so the average temperature on Earth basically stopped changing. This stability enabled an agricultural revolution and the expansion of our species. It is thanks to the stable climates that our human civilization was able to thrive. And this stability should have continued for a few more thousand years if humans had not intervened. But we made a discovery that was going to change everything. Until the 1800s, most of the world's energy had come from burning trees for heat and tool manufacturing. But then in 1784, James Watt invented something called the efficient steam engine. And with that, humans were now able to convert existing fossil fuels, so first coal and then later on oil and gas, into mechanical work. So for example, lifting varied objects or turning the wheels of a very heavy train. We started building machines to dig up more and more of these fossil fuels, and this led to the exponential growth in our energy usage that you see on this graph. So if you look closer on the graph, you will notice that the discovery of new types of fuels, such as oil and then gas, did not replace the use of existing fuels. It just added and fueled additional growth. And if you wanted to spot renewable sources of energy on the graph, you might need to grab your glasses. They're the very small bits at the top, and they have been stacking up on top of the fossil fuels, which really never stopped growing. These fossil fuels, we use them for basically everything in our life. We use them to power our homes, to fly our planes, and to drive our cars. And if you look around you in your home, pretty much every object required fossil fuels to produce them at some point. So fossil fuels have been super helpful, but unfortunately, this comes at a high price. So what are fossil fuels made of? They are made of something called hydrocarbons, meaning that amongst other things, they contain atoms of carbon. And when we burn them to make energy, the carbon in them combines with the oxygen from the air to form carbon dioxide. And that carbon dioxide goes directly in our atmosphere. One thing you need to know about CO2 is that it's an inert gas. It means that it doesn't interact with other gases in the atmosphere. So once it's up there, it stays up there for a very long period of time. Now what happens if you keep adding more and more of something that takes a really long time to dissolve in an environment? Well, the concentration of that something into the environment keeps rising, like water in a bathtub when you forget to turn the tap off. That concentration is the green line you see on this graph. It is measured in parts per million. So for 1 million molecules in the atmosphere, today 415 of them are CO2. It might seem small, but it makes a big difference. And again, for every ton of CO2 we add to the atmosphere, that number keeps rising. The other thing you need to know about CO2 is that it's a greenhouse gas. It means that it has a distinctive feature of retaining the radiation arriving on Earth from the sun. Imagine our atmosphere is a blanket. Every year we wrap an extra layer of that blanket, so we keep more and more heat in the system. On the graph, you can very clearly see the link between concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere and the average temperature. That link has been established by the scientific community since the 1850s. We have known about this for more than 150 years. The warming of the system is unequivocal. There is no longer any doubt about it, nor there is doubt about the fact that it is us humans who are causing this change. We've achieved a temperature increase of about 1.1 degrees since the end of the 70s. And this is just an average. Some regions of the globe are warming at a much faster pace. The poles, for example, are warming about 3 times faster. Australia has already warmed by 1.4 degrees. And this kind of change is unprecedented. Because more than the change itself, it's the speed at which the change is happening that is most worrying. When it occurred naturally, a change of 1 degree in average temperature should have happened over thousands of years, not decades. Okay, so the average temperature is increasing, but what does it mean exactly? How do you make sense of that 1.1 number? Does it mean that we'll just get a few more days of summer? Does it mean that we'll get a few less weeks in the dark of winter? Well, it actually makes a big difference. This image shows the continent of Australia as it was 20,000 years ago when our planet was in the middle of the last ice age. The white line is Australia as we know it today. And as you can see, the continent appears to be much larger. In fact, it was about 40% larger. So Darwin Harbour was about 300 kilometers from the coast, and you could walk from Tasmania across to mainland Australia and onto New Guinea. And the reason why the continent was larger is because the sea levels were much, much lower than today. You might wonder, where was all that water? Well, it was an ice age, so other parts of the world, like North America and Europe, were covered with massive glaciers. The ice was about 1 kilometer thick in some areas. So the water to make this ice had to come from somewhere, and that source is the ocean. So during an ice age, the ocean level drops some 100 to 120 meters. Now, let's think about the average temperature during this area. The average temperature on Earth today is 15 degrees. So what would be the average temperature then, during the Ice Age, when North America and Europe were covered with ice and Australia was 40% larger? Well, the difference between those two periods is just 5 degrees. So the average temperature then was just 10 degrees. So 5 degrees is the difference between our climate today and the climate we had in an ice age. That helps put things in perspective. But now let's talk about what we need to do to address climate change. What is the goal? Science on climate tells us that we should aim at capping the warming at 2 degrees. 2 degrees is the threshold that pretty much every country in the world, Australia included, agreed not to exceed when they signed into the Paris Agreement in 2015. An increase of 2 degrees is already a world that is profoundly different from the one we know today. And the difference between a 1.5 degrees world and a 2 degrees world is enormous. For example, 1.5 and 2 degrees is the difference between having a Great Barrier Reef and losing it entirely. And the other reason why that 2 degrees threshold was chosen is because any warming above that increases the likelihood of exceeding some very dangerous tipping points that could see our climate spiral out of control. In other words, past 2 degrees, it's not looking good. But now, how do we stay below 2 degrees? Let's take a look at the trajectory of CO2 emissions. As you can see, they have been steadily increasing since the 1900s. And if you were to try and spot the different climate conferences on this graph based on their impact on emissions, it would be very difficult, because none of the 26 climate conferences we've held since the first one in 1995 had any material impact on emissions. The only things that had a material impact on emissions are wars and the global financial crisis in 2008. But if we wanted to be serious about tackling climate change, that is the path that we would need to take. We need to reduce our emissions drastically and immediately and take them down to zero somewhere before 2050. In other words, we need to reach global carbon neutrality or net zero carbon by 2050. Net zero is the point at which humans manage to balance out the carbon we put in the atmosphere and the carbon we remove from the atmosphere. And we must get halfway there by 2030. For that to happen, emissions need to fall by roughly 7% every year until 2050. That's if we start reducing emissions in 2020. But the more we wait, the harder it gets. And to put this in perspective, 7% is roughly the emission reductions that occurred in 2020 due to COVID-19. It means that every year we need to find new, additional ways to reduce our emissions on top of reductions already achieved. Currently, that's not the direction we're taking. After the economy bounced back after COVID-19, emissions are projected to rebound near pre-pandemic levels. Now let's take a look at the consequences of climate change and why we should care. We've already seen some of these consequences today in a world that has warmed by 1.1 degrees. We've seen fires. On the left, that's California, and on the right, that's Greece. Both images are from last summer. Australia has also seen the Black Summer fires from 2019. We've seen droughts. On the left, it's a picture of a truck transporting salmon to the sea in California because rivers are drying up and it's too hot for the salmon to survive. But you know, people need their sushi. On the right, we see a child from Madagascar suffering from malnutrition because of the climate-induced famine. In some regions, it's not enough water, and in others, it's too much of it. On the left, we see a picture of damages caused by floods in northern New South Wales just recently. And on the right, that's the New York City subway being completely flooded due to torrential rains last year. The infrastructure is completely unprepared for climate change. These events are not the new normal. They are a precursor of more to come. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on the bad stuff that happens because of climate change. One, because you're hearing about these impacts a lot already. And two, because research suggests that it's a really counterproductive way to get people to listen and take action. Fear alone does not motivate people. It needs to be paired with a clear call to action. And we'll get to that. But climate change is here and it's going to get worse before it gets better. But we don't have to settle for doom and gloom. We have everything to gain from taking action and everything to lose from choosing inaction. There is a future worth looking forward to, but we need to fight for it. Now let's take a look at how we fix climate change. First, I want to acknowledge that it's really easy to feel powerless in front of the climate crisis. It's easy to think, I'm just one person in 7.6 billion. How am I supposed to make any sort of difference? If you're only going to remember one thing from this presentation, I want it to be this. You can make a difference. There are so many ways that you can contribute. And you're not alone. The climate movement is growing and it needs everyone on board. So today I want to leave you with 3 actions that you can start taking. Number 1 is deconstruct. Deconstruct means looking within yourself and analyzing the lens through which you see the world. What are the shared beliefs, values, and norms that shaped your view of the world? How do you define success? And why do you think this is? I invite you to be open and curious and ready to challenge some of the stories that the world impresses upon us. Maybe there is no such thing as a clean energy source. Maybe infinite growth is not possible on a finite planet. That's deconstructing. The second thing is learning about the problem. You cannot solve a problem without understanding it. Sounds simple, but it's true. There's no information gap on climate change, but there are a lot of loud voices that are muddying the waters because they have vested interest in maintaining the status quo. So you need to pay attention. And if you choose to deep dive in these topics, I can guarantee that you will find it fascinating. Worrying and scary sometimes, but truly fascinating. You probably know the person on the left. She's the face of the movement. But I want to bring your attention to the person on the right. His name is Guillermo Fernandez. He's a father of 3 and a normal citizen of Switzerland. Recently, he put an end to a 39 days hunger strike to get his demand approved by the Swiss parliament. What was his demand? Well, he wasn't asking for something radical. He was just asking for the members of the Swiss Federal Assembly to receive formal training by official scientific organizations on climate and major environmental issues. And to get that, he had to quit his job, protest for 39 days, lose 20 kilos, and risk dying. It sounds extreme, but think about it. All he was asking was for them to educate themselves. What is crazy, in my opinion, is not what he did, but the fact that he had to go to these extreme lengths to do something that is pure common sense. You cannot solve a problem without understanding it. This brings me to the third thing you can do. And that is bring your superpower. What is it that will be your contribution to climate change? This is your zone of impact, but with a climate lens. And your superpower will be at the intersection of 3 things. what you're good at, what brings you joy, and the climate solution the world needs. So to sum up, I'm going to use this framework that a brilliant climate communicator came up with. So here's the bottom line on climate change. 1, it's warming. We're already at 1.1 degrees. If we get to 2 degrees, it's close to game over. And 5 degrees is what separates our climate today from an ice age. Number 2, it's us. Humans are entirely responsible for the shifting climate. This is happening because we are hooked on fossil fuels. 3, we're sure. There's 100% consensus among scientists. 4, it's bad. Unless we start taking drastic action, we are heading into a world that is not desirable for anyone. And 5, we can fix it. But not only we can fix it, we have the single most exciting opportunity to reverse the trend, change the course of history, and safeguard our future and our children's future. It's a daunting task, but there is hope. We have to get out there and actively look for that hope that will motivate us to act. I will leave you with this quote from a famous writer and activist. Hope is not a lottery ticket you can sit on the sofa and clutch, feeling lucky. Hope is an axe you break down doors with in an emergency. That was my 20 minutes case for climate action, and thank you very much.